Aloha and welcome to Adopting the Older Child. Today we're going to be talking about intercountry adoption. I'm Christine Altwies, Executive Director of Hawaii International Child. I'm very excited to have two guests today. J.D. Wagner, welcome.
Hi, Christine.
J.D. is the China Program Director for Hawaii International Child and mother of two children adopted from China.
Yeah.
And Mary Swanson is an adoption advocate and mother of four children, all teenagers, all adopted from China.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank
you
you
for being here. So, as I said, we're talking today about China adoptions. I think when people think about China adoptions were very big in the late 90s, early 2000s, and at that time, people were adopting healthy infant girls. And at that time, I think China was sending maybe 10 to 12,000 girls per year to the U.S. and Europe. It was a very successful program that made a lot of children and families very happy. That stage of China adoptions is pretty much over. I don't know the exact number, but I believe maybe 1,000, 2,000 children a year are coming out from China in that traditional program. And what's happened is that now China and the U.S. and partners in Europe are looking at the older children in China who are in need of permanent families. Is that right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're going to be talking about who those children are, what the process involves, and why someone should consider adopting an older waiting child from China. So, J.D., when we talk about these children, what kinds of children are we talking about, and why are they in need of permanent families?
Well, the children are both boys and girls are available for adoption from China. They're primarily boys, and they range in age from 2 years to about 13 years old. Most of them have some sort of medical or physical need, what we commonly call special needs. Although some of them are healthy children, but they're considered special needs because they are older. They live primarily in the orphanages. Some are in foster care, but mostly in orphanages. And because their families couldn't properly care for them.
Okay, so China did have a one-child policy, which I think was recently lifted, but that probably hasn't really affected this situation yet.
Not yet, yeah.
Okay, so you say older children are actually as young as 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So the 2-year-olds, I would imagine.
Their 2-year-old would be more on the rarer side, but usually 3, 4, 5, the 7, 8-year-olds, there are a lot of those children,
Okay.
and primarily boys, like I said.
Okay, primarily boys. Why?
Well, boys, if we're looking back in the past where they want the one child, they want a healthy boy, or they have a second child. If the child wasn't what they would consider healthy, then the child was,
Would end up in an orphanage.
Would end up
Okay.
in the orphanage, yes.
Okay, so one-child policy no longer affects so much. Children end up in the orphanage for a variety of reasons, sometimes at birth, sometimes even when they're older. Okay, so if somebody wants a 2-year-old from China, what kind of child might be in need 2-year-old right now in China? Would that be a healthy girl?
It would not be a healthy girl.
Okay.
It would be a girl probably with a moderate to severe needs, maybe multiple needs, spina bifida, something, blindness, deafness.
Okay, all right. Okay, so children who are blind, deaf, these are maybe needs that a lot of families wouldn't be able to consider. It's a special kind of child.
Yes.
Is this program successful? Who are adopting these children right now? What kinds of people are adopting these children?
All kinds of people are adopting these children, and there are a variety of needs. There are those families that feel that they can accommodate a child with a severe need, and yay, we're so glad that they can.
Thank goodness for those
Yeah,
families.
exactly,
Right.
exactly. And then there are some needs that on paper might look severe. For example, some congenital heart defects. Because, I can't take a child with a heart defect. But some of those just require nominal care. Maybe they've had their heart repaired where they were in China. They get adopted to the U.S. and they just need to see their cardiologist once a year.
Okay.
Then no restrictions and no medication.
Right.
So on the surface, that might seem, whoa, this is a very scary thing. But doing your homework about conditions helps, and people are doing that. They are looking at maybe I can accommodate a child like that in my home.
Right.
For example, when we adopted our third child, GE, he had a cleft lip and palate that was surgically corrected in China. And then he had, about 2 years after the adoption, he had some surgery in Colorado. We were living there at the time. And then most recently, about a year ago, he did have a bone, hip
Graft.
hip graft put into the fistula, the hole in the mouth. So, more of a cosmetic special need, I would say, or, not something that's so severe.
And
So,
he was
there's
how
a range.
old when you adopted him?
He was 4.5 when we adopted.
Okay. So full disclosure, I think this is kind of an interesting fact of this little group of women here is that JD, you have 2 children from China.
I do.
One came through the traditional program.
Yes, she did.
She was young, girl, healthy, and then you adopted a boy who was, at the time of adoption,
3.5.
3.5, and he had a medical condition, which at this point, it sounds like doesn't really affect any of his day-to-day
Nope,
living.
it does not. In fact, he's the congenital heart defect that I talked about. We do take him to the pediatric cardiologist once a year, but he has no restrictions. He plays soccer. In fact, that's his goal, to be a professional soccer player, and everything's great.
Okay. And Mary, you have 4.
I have 4 we adopted. I adopted Maylee as a single parent when she was 7 months old in '98. Then a 2.5-year-old daughter, Lena. And then G was 4.5 when we adopted him. And then most recently we got back last March with a 13-year-old boy.
Okay.
Healthy boy. So his special need was that he was older,
Okay, and he was
but
13
healthy.
when you got him.
13 years old.
Okay. So now you have 13, 14, 15, 16. Or 14, 15, 16, 17.
17.
14, 16, 17, 17, yes.
Uh-huh. Okay, great. So you can speak to all aspects of parenting, and I really admire someone with 4 teenagers in the home. That's pretty amazing. And then I adopted, for full disclosure, a daughter who was 1-year-old at the time from China, and most recently an 11-year-old son from China whose special need is that he was older and had no medical conditions. How common would you say the older child with no medical conditions situation is at this point?
There are some. Usually there's some sort of condition, though, but usually not that severe.
Okay.
So they just haven't been able to be adopted until they're older.
Okay, great. So what drew you to China, Mary?
I went to teach in China in 1990, and actually, most people know the story. My passport, I needed more passport pages, so I went to the consulate in Guangzhou, and I picked up it was an information packet on paper about adopting from the PRC, and I remember at the time I was very upset because I read it and you had to be married at the time, and I was single. So then the law had changed, and then later I chose to adopt from China, later married my husband, and then we adopted 4 children after that. So for me, I think it was that I lived in China, so I had that connection. I think different people have a connection for whatever reason to the country that they choose, and I think you go to what speaks to you.
And why is that important for you or for the child? Why would you say to a parent who's considering adopting from China, you should really have a connection to China before you consider this?
I think it's not necessarily you had to have been to the place. I'm sure there are people that adopt from China that fall in love with a picture of the child. Maybe they're thinking of going as a tourist to visit, but what's important is that you keep them connected to their country. I mean, that's very important. They're coming to the United States, but that is their heritage. That is where they came from. So I think it's very important that you really think about where you're adopting from, and can you give that child what they need to continue to be connected with where they came from.
Right. I mean, one of the things that we're very aware of in adoption is helping the child develop a good sense of self and helping the child feel comfortable with who he or she is, because we do know that a lot of children who are adopted are more likely to suffer from self-esteem or identity confusion issues if questions can't be answered or if there isn't a positive context for where they come from.
Right.
And they are going to be looking to you as the parents to be demonstrating a love of their country and a love of where they come from, because that also then transfers to a love of them. So if parents don't fully embrace every aspect of that child, including where that child comes from,
Right.
then the child may take that as a sign or a signal that you only accept part of who that child is.
And
right?
I think nowadays it's so much easier to do that because of all the information we have, all the books that have been written. Back when I adopted Maylise, that was 1998, there were only a few books to read to her about a little girl who came from China to the United States to be with her family. So nowadays, I don't think there's really an excuse not to keep them connected. There's so much information out there now that there wasn't early on.
And it's not necessarily the case that the children are going to jump up and down with joy when you bring these China items into their life, right? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, my kids love all their China items, so we're not there yet. But maybe when they get older, it won't be quite such a interesting, fun thing. Right now, it is. So, and they're very fascinated with their country, so with their birth country. So, we make it a point of celebrating holidays, eating Chinese food. Just having their Chinese things around, and they right now they love it.
I think at different stages in their life they're going to embrace it or not embrace it. With our last adoption, Changwei was 13, so now we're in the I don't want to go to Chinese school. I want to totally immerse in the American culture. So even today when I was at his school, there was a family from China that walked by, and I said, talk to them. He said, no. He said, hello, how are you, in English. So, I mean, he's a typical teenager. He wants to fit in.
Yeah.
He doesn't want that aspect to be foremost when people meet him, but certainly when he's older, who knows?
And this is a little off topic, but I find it interesting, the names. So your children have American names, sort of.
They have, yes.
Not typical Chinese names.
Right. Their middle names are Chinese.
Right. And your children, it sounds
all
like...
have Chinese names.
Okay.
So Mei Li was very close to Mary, so she was named, I was named after my grandmother, so she's third generation. Ma Li, Mei Li is close. Lina is also Chinese, Lina, Ziyi, and Changwei. So they all have Chinese names.
And they chose those names, or they accepted them? What about your most recent?
Most recent, Changwei his name was Yu Changwei, and when he came for the host program before we adopted him for a month, we asked him what he wanted to be called in the future. And all the other children have 4 names, 2 middle. And I said, do you want a middle name? And he said, no, he just wants Changwei Swanson. So he decided on what he was going to be called when he came to the U.S.
Good. It's nice to give them that opportunity if they're old
When
enough
they're older,
to have.
yes, definitely.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Great. So the children end up in the orphanages for a variety of reasons. Often at birth, if they have a physical condition that prevents their birth family from being able to care for them, and I think that's an important distinction. Is that often we're talking about people in a rural area, maybe who don't have access to or knowledge of medical conventions, and they may see a defect and be concerned that they can't care for that child. And some of the children end up in the orphanages when they're older because of death in the family, or some of the children may be that second or third child who wasn't a permitted child, although that's now changing. What can we say about the impact that this start in life has on these children? What has been your experience in terms of the psychosocial, emotional development or sort of adjustment of these children? Maybe you through your professional, because your kids are still so young and they came young, but you've had a few clients who have adopted older children. And you have personally experienced that. I know a lot of families are afraid. We talked in the previous segment about that window, that 0 to 3 window, that a lot of prospective parents focus on when considering how to create or enlarge their family. They may be focused on wanting a younger child because of this idea that a child over the age of 3 is no longer malleable or can no longer bond, can no longer take on some of the family traits. And for many parents, this is a very personal project.
Yes,
I'm going to raise a child who's going to be in my own likeness, or I'm going to want to somehow ensure that this child goes out and is a productive member of society, and as if that's all in our control.
Right.
So to the parents who are saying, well, I only want to consider a child under the age of 3, here we're talking mostly about older kids, what can we say about how these kids are doing, how they're bonding and attaching? Do you have some thoughts?
You go first.
Okay.
Well, it is true. The younger the child, at most, it can be easier to have them transition. Although my daughter was 15 months and she screamed for 3 days, so that was a challenge. And my 3.5-year-old just came right on with us. That being said, we have had a few adoptions this year with older children, and the beginning has, to be honest, they can be shaky. But with any child being adopted, you are rocking their whole world, no matter if they're 15 months or 13 years old. What they know is no longer part of their life. And it's like us picking up and moving to wherever, and we don't know anything. We don't know the people. We don't know the language. The food is different. The smells are different. So you have to be ready for those challenges and to be open to that and to be patient and to go back to, why am I adopting? And just be patient. Find those resources. Your adoption agency. We are there to help you, and we will help you through this. If there's challenges, there might not be. It might be later on down the road. And what is an adoption challenge, and what is a teenage or middle school adolescent type behavior? So
I think one of the big things is that these children all come with a certain amount of loss. They've experienced loss at a very early age. They were in an orphanage. Their biological family couldn't take care of them. So that's the first loss. With some children, maybe there have been 2, 3, 4 losses by the time they come to you. So I think we've all had losses in our life, and if we just look back on what it was like to get through those, you can help the children. I mean, I think if your heart is open, and you feel that it's something you can do, that it can be challenging, but by the same token, very, very rewarding.
So I guess a sense of humor.
Sense of humor, flexibility,
Flexibility.
and patience.
Patience. And that sort of an eye on the long term. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? So we're really trying to get to the finish line and help these children become adults who understand where they fit in and why the world is the way it is. We often hear from families, that they want to save a child, or people will tell you, how wonderful you are to have saved this child, what a heroic,
lucky they are,
how lucky the children are.
Right.
And obviously, that's probably said with the best intentions. People enjoy complimenting other people, but I guess one thing that we want to emphasize is that as an adoptive mom, I certainly feel that I'm the one who is lucky. I'm the one who benefits from this. It's the greatest learning experience of my life so far. It's a challenge, and it brings so much joy and learning with it. And we want to be careful not to make the children feel like they have to be grateful.
Exactly. That they're less than, because they're not biological.
Right, and that they should just be grateful for whatever crumbs life throws their way. They have the same entitlements as anyone else.
Right.
They have the same opportunity to be unhappy, to complain, to not like things if things don't feel right. We also hear that, how lucky the child is to be taken from a desolate orphanage and placed in this sort of Disneyland family situation where they have their own room and their own this and all their own. And sometimes that's so horrible for the child because it's different, right?
That's right.
So,
they're used to having a lot of people around, or a lot of children.
Right. So it's not necessarily better for a child just because there's more material resource connected with the new life, right? And I think it's important to...
I think that's an interesting thing you touch on, is that culturally, the older children are dealing more with cultural issues. Like Chong Wei is dealing with what it's like to be alone in a room, to not have his 3 roommates, like he did in China. So a lot of the older children, it's cultural issues that they're facing day to day. Very different than if you have an infant.
Even my son, though, at 3.5, he did not want to be alone, and he still doesn't. He wants to be, and right now they're young enough that my daughter and my son share a room, but he doesn't like being alone still. He wants to be with someone. And so, we do. We are, okay, you're coming with me.
Right, and I guess that's part of the important flexibility that we're talking about, is that we can't assume that just because it looks better, it's nicer, it's fancier, it's more expensive, that the child will understand and respond to that.
Right.
Children don't like change. And as you said at the beginning, you are literally taking a child, ripping him out of everything that's comfortable and familiar, plopping him down in something that's completely foreign. And just because we love you to death and we're here for you for the long run, we
Right.
expect you to respond to that positively is not necessarily.
I
They
think,
don't-
I
they
think
don't
parents
understand
that
that
don't
yet.
see that through, I say to them, if you went to China and you were stuck there, could you get into the proper bathroom? Could you eat? Could you be able to go to a hotel? Could you be able to find a place to sleep? So
Tell a cab driver where to
I
go.
mean, tell a cab driver where to go, although most people speak English there. But anyway, yeah, I think if you put yourself in the child's position, truly, it teaches you to be more flexible, to be more understanding.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think is particularly hard for educated or enlightened adults is to disabuse ourselves of the idea that we know best, right? Because as parents, we assume that our ability to know best at all moments is going to get us through. And sometimes we have to learn from our children, and we have to take cues from our children about what they need and how we can adjust to.
You mean when they don't want to go to Chinese school? I've taken the cue. I've taken the
when
cue.
they don't want to go to Chinese, when they don't want to eat the
Exactly.
nutritious food that you're
Exactly.
providing, and they prefer instead to cook white
cook their
noodles and
eggs.
eat hot dogs every night, which
Right.
is something that for me personally has been a huge learning experience. I have a variety of children in my home. Some of them I've had since birth, and those children have acclimated to the very nutritious, healthy food that I serve them, quite happily every night. And here comes my 11-year-old son, who luckily I had been tipped off by previous parents, and so I caught on to this before I created a complete disaster, that he did not like the nutritious, lovely, bizarre food I was serving, and he wanted his comfort food.
Right.
And I was thinking back on my own childhood and how important, as
we
you
all
were
have
saying,
our comfort food.
and comfort
things
is
that remind you-
everything,
yeah,
right? So
exactly.
we need to identify what is comfort and where is my comfortable place and how can I feel comfort, and then try and, as you said, put yourself in your children's shoes. And
Well, I also think, touching on that too, what we were saying about rocking their world, that's also food is their control.
Right.
I can control it. I can control this where I can't control anything else that's happened to me. I can control what I eat or what I don't eat.
We're at dinner last night, and Chang Wei says, "What's for breakfast?" We're at breakfast. What are you bringing me for lunch today? So yes, it is a control. And it makes him feel good to get
Yeah.
the Chinese food that he got every day for 14 years in China.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so great things to be thinking about. Part of the wonderful challenges that we can look forward to as prospective adoptive parents, if you are considering this. So what kind of parents should be considering applying for a China Waiting Child program?
Mary?
I think the biggest thing for me is an open heart, is that you go to adopt a child because they need a home, they need a family, and it's that simple. It's really nothing more than that. They need a family, and if you can provide that family, that's all, with an open heart,
And a little bit of it should be selfish, because if we don't have that selfish connection, then it's a humanitarian deed, right? So I think it's a combination of wanting to be able to provide for the child, but also truly needing that experience of being
Exactly.
a parent.
Right.
I want a parent.
Yeah, because you have to have, there's got to be something in it for you. Because, at the end of the day, we may not be as altruistic as we like to think we are. When times get tough and that
Shame
kid
on
is just,
Yeah.
right, becoming, is wearing on us a bit, there's got to be something in
I
it for
think
you.
I always knew I wanted to adopt because my grandmother's father was adopted. So I always grew up with that story. I always knew I wanted to adopt. I didn't know where until I went to live in China. So that was that connection.
Tell us a little bit about the process, JD.
Well, first of all, you can call us at Hawaii International Child, and I'll walk you through the little nitty-gritty details. But basically, we'd work to help you identify a child that you feel you could accommodate in your family, and then work through the paperwork to get your approval from the Chinese and the U.S. governments, and to enable you to bring your child home. Roughly, this would take average about 18 months.
From beginning to end,
From beginning to
having a
end.
child in your home.
About
Okay.
18 months.
Okay, and what kinds of information can people look forward to having about the particular child they may want to adopt?
China does provide you with the basic medical that they've given when the child becomes available for international adoption. However, once you commit to a child, we usually can get updates for the child, more detailed medical, pictures, video. So we get as much as we can. China's been very forthcoming with most of our requests for that.
Great. And they can review child profiles on a secure website that we have?
Yes, they can. We have children that could go to our website and look at the children and see. There's usually a child that speaks to you, like, oh, there's something about that child, and then you can request information on that child. And we encourage, and we want you to take the information to a doctor, preferably one that's familiar with international adoption, and to have that medical looked over. We are not medical professionals, so they can best advise you on what you could look forward to with your child.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Mary, I know that you are advocating for a number of children. You've been working hard, even though you have 4 children at home and probably a little bit to do there. You're still out looking for families from time to time when particular children cross your path. And I know you recently had a great success in finding a family for a friend of your
Chang
son.
Wei's, yes, for his best friend. So actually, Chang Wei's best friend's file and his roommate from China turned up with Hawaii International Child. So that was exciting, and I've met the mom and dad who are adopting him in California and went to visit them. So yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah, they're very excited.
Yeah, that's great. That must feel nice for your son, too, to know that his best friend and roommate is not going to be in the orphanage now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he actually was on the telephone to talk to the parents, so I think he has a real sense that and he was very involved in the adoption happening, in them choosing his friend. So.
Oh, what a great story. I love
Yeah.
that. Get goosebumps. Okay, so we've got about a minute left, and I think if anyone's interested, the information is going to be rolling on the screen, how to contact HIC. JD is standing by during regular office hours to answer questions. And people like Mary are in the background cheering on anyone who's considering this. Any final words of advice or encouragement to people who are considering it?
Well, if you're on the fence, you've thought about it, and give us a call, and we'll talk you through and see where that leads you. I'm not saying for sure that you'll go that way, but you'll have a better idea of what you want to do.
It's very personal. It's a personal decision.
It is very personal.
And I think, as JD said, one child will speak to you, and for whatever reason, then you can't imagine life without that child, and then for me, the next.
Exactly.
And the next, down to 4. Can't imagine, a time that they weren't all there.
Yeah. Oh, it's lovely. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.